how to start seeds. I'm going to give you a little bit of background first. Otherwise, some of this stuff I'm going to be telling you doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, a seed is like a baby. Everything's there that that baby needs. The baby's there. The whole seed is the embryo. It's got the food. It's got the ability when it leaves out to bring in more food. And it's got the root system, the baby root system that's there to bring up the nutrients and the water, the nutrient and water exchange. If you open up a bean seed, this is the cotyledon, and it's like the backpack where the lunch is. All the food stuff is back in here, all the nutrient, all the food storage stuff this little plant needs to get started.
Down there just so I can hear it better.
Please mute your mics. Thanks. Here's the little beginning of the little root that comes out and the little beginning of the seeds. So it's all there. We want to get this seed to germinate, and it has some triggers. The first trigger is water. The water has to be able to be absorbed into the seed, and it starts to swell, and that triggers the process of germination. The embryo starts to wake up, and it uses all these stored proteins, and it begins to get going. And this will trigger the beginning of the root going down into the soil. And I'm going to play this, not for very long, but this is an amazing time-lapse video. I don't know how it'll come along. Somebody please tell me if it's terrible and we'll stop. So the little leaf has swollen with the water. It's triggered all those processes that make it start going. Its little root is seeking out moisture and nutrients, food. And now the leaves are going to start coming out and reaching for the light. There it goes. 7 days into the process. Look at it looking for the light. This is a wonderful video, but I'll stop it now. But it goes on until it's much bigger. So the leaves are little solar panels, if you will, because they are the ones, that's what gives the plant its energy. It makes sugar, and sugar is converted to energy, and it makes the plant grow. And then the plant produces its fruit and then its seeds. But it all starts with that little seed packet, that little baby in there that is just all ready to go if we're treating it right. Oops, that doesn't work. Let's try that. So what do seeds actually need to germinate? They need proper soil temperature, whether you're planting them indoors or outside. They need the right soil moisture, not too wet, not too dry. They need air and oxygen, and they need light, very important. And a seed needs contact with the soil. And we're going to look at each one of these a little bit in detail, not too much. Every kind of plant has its own ideal temperature range for germination. And in this WSU document, Home Vegetable Gardening in Washington, on page 10 and 11, and this is in the handout, and if you look in in the chat box, you've got the link to these handouts and to this presentation, and when I get the video, I'll put it there too. But on page 10 and 11, it shows you just about every kind of seed there is. This is just an excerpt from it. But you can see that lettuce has an ideal germination temperature of the soil of 40 to 80 degrees. That can be planted outside. Now, almost. Well, maybe not right now. But the lettuce, 50 to 80. Temperature for tomatoes and peppers, it's entirely different. And usually the ideal soil temperature is somewhere in the middle of these ranges. Peppers are the hardest to grow in the Pacific Northwest. They need very warm temperatures to germinate. They need warm nights. and they need hot days. And while we've got the nice warm days, we do not have hot nights. So that's why it's so hard to grow them here. I know some of you are thinking, I grow them easily. Well, I live at 1,000 feet, and it's not that easy for me. So anyway, any temperature above or below that range can be difficult. It'll either go dormant, the seed will go dormant, or it'll damage the seed, usually if it's too high. And if you look at the seed pack or a chart like this, that's your best source of information. Germination range for a tomato seed is between 50 and 95, and the optimal is about 85. But the lettuce, it's a cool weather vegetable, and if the temperature is 80 degrees, it's not going to germinate, because the seed knows, it knows that 80 degrees is going to be too hot for it to grow, so it just goes back to sleep until the weather or the conditions are better for it. So moisture, not too wet, not too dry. And it should be about the texture, the consistency of a wrung out sponge. You might, if you squeezed it really hard, get a couple drops of water out of it, but probably not. And it will, even the seed starting mix will kind of hold together. It's not going to just crumble when you pick it up. The optimal soil moisture for most seeds is about 70 to 75% of the capacity that this sponge can hold. So if you drench it, wring it out, pretty much to almost dry, then that's about what your soil moisture should be. Oxygen. You think, yeah, there's oxygen all over the place. You know, we don't have a problem with that. The seed should be able to get that. But if you've got too much water, if your soil, your seed medium is too waterlogged, it displaces the oxygen, and there's no oxygen available to the plant. If there's too much water, then there's no germination. And one of the reasons that we use the seed start mix is it's light and it's fluffy. It's not able to be compacted as easily as, say, garden soil or even purchased potting soil. And there are other reasons we use the soil mix too. Light. Most seeds don't need light to germinate, and some of them do better in the dark. However, light is probably the most important aspect, especially if you're growing seedlings indoors. But we'll talk about that later. The seed has to have good contact with the soil because the roots have to have a good place to anchor, and they have to be able to go down there easily and not dry out on their way down. It needs access to soil moisture to continue the germination process. You saw how that main root put out the little roots right away. It's sending out both for anchor and to get moisture and nutrition up. Well, actually, it doesn't need nutrition at this point, but to get moisture up to the seed. And the seed coat itself has to be next to the soil to be able to absorb the water to keep the process going too. So, timing considerations. I get a lot of questions about this. When should I start my seeds? Well, you have to look at several things on the seed packet. You'll see on the back, days to germination. It'll say, how long does it take to germinate? And usually 7 to 12 to 14 days. And then the second thing you see is days to maturity. Now let's talk about that, and it'll give you a better idea of when you plant your plants. First of all, you have to know the last frost date for the summer vegetables you're going to be planting. According to weather data, the last frost in Longview, anyway, is May 15th. I don't believe it. I've seen that happen too many times to have a frost after that. In fact, I'll tell you a dirty little secret of the master gardeners. We actually kind of hope that people go out and go to the big box stores and buy their tomatoes and put them in on that one really nice week we have in May or in early April. And by the time May 15th comes around, their plants are all dead and they come to our plant sale and buy our plants. So if you want to have plants that live, know what the last frost date is and go from there. So the seed packet would say, 8 weeks. Sow the seeds 8 weeks before the last frost date. So we would back that up, right? you work backwards. We would start the seeds on March 15th. And that way, on May 15th, the seedling should be of a size that you could put it in the ground on May 15th. However, you're probably better off starting it 6 weeks before the last frost date and plan on giving them an extra 2 weeks. So plant it on the 1st of June. I think that is a really, really good idea. When I first moved here, people told me don't plant your plants until the second week of July. And up here where I live, if I don't take special precautions, that's what I have to do because we get a lot of late frosts. There are ways that you can extend the growing season so that you can start your plants earlier and get them in the soil. But that's a different talk, and Art will be talking about that. I'm not sure when the date is, but sometime relatively soon. And again, if you live at higher elevations, you know that the nights are colder and you know that the days are colder. And there are things that you have to consider there, ways that make it easier for you to grow the plants that you want to grow and actually get vegetables from them. We got tomatoes this year. We were getting tomatoes into the beginning of November. We didn't start getting tomatoes until the end of September because it was too cold at night. Can you start them earlier? You know, you can, but it doesn't work out really well. When we were first starting to grow, a bunch of master gardeners were growing a bunch of their plants at home. We started our tomato plants really early, like, end of February, beginning of March. And we ended up with these huge gangly plants that just really weren't healthy because the indoor environment really doesn't give these plants enough to get going. A larger plant needs more light, it needs a larger pot, it needs more room for its roots to grow, and it needs more fertility. And by the time it's a couple weeks past the last frost date, like we're recommending that you transplant, your plants are just really kind of wimpy, and really you have absolutely no advantage over planting them 6 weeks before the expected last frost date and then getting them in 2 weeks later than that. Again, you can plant it earlier than the expected frost date, but you've got to plan for it. I'll tell you one of the ways I did that. Again, because I live where I live, I got a black plastic bag, and I got one of those silly little double ring tomato cages. And I stuck it inside the bag and shoved it into the ground, the spokes into the ground, and then cut a hole and put my tomato in there. And at night, I covered it up so it had that black plastic during the day, and the black plastic helped to heat the soil around it. And then when I closed it at night, it stayed relatively warm in there. And then come daytime, I uncovered it again. And I was actually able to get the tomato to, it did really well transplanting, but it's very time consuming, and you've got to pay attention. So, how many days to germination? What influences that? First of all, soil temperature. Again, it should be at the correct range for that type of seed. The amount of moisture, too much, too little, it won't work, but just right is perfect. The depth of how deep you sowed those seeds, the light, which isn't that important during germination, and the age or the quality of the seed. Okay, when can you expect to harvest your crops? This is another thing people have, it's kind of confusing. If the packet tells you to direct sow, to take that seed and go put it in your garden, like right now, like you could, in a couple weeks, you could probably do lettuce outside. And the harvest time that's on the seed packet, the clock starts ticking then. If it says direct sow outside and you do, and it says harvest will be in 36 days, 36 days from now, you can harvest that lettuce. However, indoors, when you start your plants, say on March 15th, the clock doesn't start ticking until you transplant it into your garden. So if you look at a plant, a seed packet, and it says 60 days to maturity, That means 60 days from the day that you plant that outside in your garden. So you have to kind of figure that. For example, if you sow the seeds, the tomato seeds on March 15th and transplant on May 15th, and on the seed packet, it says this tomato will be, phase to maturity is 75 days, which isn't bad for the Pacific Northwest, then you should, if everything else is good, you should be able to harvest on August 1st. And again, weather and other conditions make a big difference. The biggest difference we have out here is our colder nights. The summer vegetables really like the 70, 75 degree nights that you get back east and down south. This is a really, really good guide. The Vegetable Gardening in Washington, the link is in the chat box. It is an amazing book, and this is on page 11 and 12, and this is just an excerpt. It's got, I don't know how many, it's got 2 full pages of this. This dot tells you can sow it outdoors at the end of February. Dot, again, you can do it at the beginning of March. So in that time frame. And then the seedling growth takes place where it's yellow. And then beginning of September, you can start harvesting it. These are all kind of liquid. They change a little bit depending on your conditions. Now let's go to tomato. I'm not sure exactly where this is from, but it tells you start the transplant, you start the seed here indoors, and then you transplant at the beginning of June. So they're only giving it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I prefer 6 or 8 weeks before. But that's how you read this, and it's got a list of all the different kinds of vegetables and how you should plant them here in the Pacific Northwest. If you're new to the Pacific Northwest, this is an invaluable guide. Okay, people want to know, does it matter if it's organic or non-organic seed? I'm going to tell you about the organic seed, but I also just saw a study by, I think it was the University of Maryland, and they did a side-by-side study of organic versus non-organic seed. And as far as plant vegetable quality, there was none. However, organically grown seeds have been selected for their proven natural resilience and the beneficial traits for their that carry forth through all the new plants. They go through a strict process. Obviously, they have to be grown according to industry standards. And it's important if you're selling organic produce, if you're going to tell people this is organically grown. And it's more resilient because these kind of plants don't rely on any chemical help. No support. They don't get pesticides. They don't get herbicides, no chemical fertilizers, nothing like that. They overcome or die. And so the ones, it's kind of the survival of the fittest. If once they collect those seeds, they're good plants, and you're going to get the seeds from those good plants. And those traits are passed on. And it's also important if you want to support companies that practice sustainability. That's important as well. Then there's the question, marketing is this GMO versus non-GMO is a marketing gimmick because homeowners, the public can't buy GMO seeds. They're expensive. They're only sold to big companies. So they're all non-GMO, even if it doesn't state that. Keep records. I can't tell you how important that is. I always think I'm going to remember. Now, I've taken pictures, but I haven't actually said when I planted them. I know the name because I usually put that. I'll text myself with that. The date sown, the date germinated, and the date transplanted. That's the very basics. You also want to keep records of how you watered it. Did you use heat on it? What were the room and soil temperatures, and did you fertilize? If you did, how much? How'd you do it? General observations about that variety and the way you've grown it. The seed variety of type, of course, and how old the seed was, if you know that, if somebody gave it to you. You want to know details about the light that you used. And I'll be talking about this later, too. I grew some tomatoes. It wasn't last year. It was the year before. I followed all the directions except that I went to a hydroponics store and I bought some of their fertilizer. And I was just amazed at how my plants grew. And I mean, 2 days late after I planted the seeds, after I sowed the seeds, they were up. And they ended up 6 weeks later, they're probably over 1.5 feet tall. That is not good for a plant. It really isn't. The stems were very, very fragile. They broke very easily. They actually, it's kind of like bringing a baby home from the hospital. Their little heads just kind of wobble around on their shoulders until they get stronger. These plants never had a chance to get stronger because they were so busy growing. There's a fine point that you want to reach when you're trying to grow seedlings. So we're going to kind of get into what we're going to be doing here. You start with a sterile seed start mix. I should have brought it in with me, but they're selling, I think it's Jiffy, maybe 7 quarts. I can't remember how many quarts, but I saw them at a couple places. I think the least expensive I saw it was at Walmart, and it was less than $5 for a large bag. It's light, it's fluffy, but it dries out easily. But because it's light and fluffy, it doesn't compact easily, and the roots can travel through it very easily. There's lots of oxygen there, a lot of ease of getting those little roots started. If you're using a sterile mix, you don't have any of the pathogens, the fungal pathogens in the soil. Some of them can cause a disease called damping off. I don't know if you've ever seen this. You start it and everything looks hunky-dory, and the next day you go out there and the thing is laying on its side, and the top of it looks fine until you pull it out of the ground and the roots are dead because the fungus killed it. You want to keep things as clean as possible, and cold, damp conditions foster that, and poor air circulation. And we'll talk about a way to overcome that indoors. So if you get, it's a 12-quart bag. If you get a 12-quart bag of this sterile seed starting mix and put it in one of those big Home Depot buckets and add a 1/2 gallon of hot tap water, that makes, I've done this before and I've measured it out, so I know this is just about right. And if you add that to the seed starting mix in the bucket and mix it up with your hands, that is the perfect moisture. That's exactly what you want to see. And then you fill, I have 3.5-inch pots, but it can be whatever you have. Fill them to the very top. You can either plant 2 or 3 seeds per pot, or you can create a little forest and put 15 to 20 seeds per pot. They'll have to be transplanted, the 15 to 20. And if the 2 to 3 seeds are in a 4.5-inch pot, you'll have to thin them, but you probably won't have to move them to a larger pot before you put them outside. So you place the desired seeds on top of the soil, and it depends on the size of the seed. The general rule of thumb is that you shouldn't plant it any deeper than the seed is twice the width of the seed. So when you're talking tomato seeds, those are very small. You just want it barely under the soil. And there are a couple ways you can do that. You can place it just on top of the soil and then brush your hand over, covering the seeds, or you can sprinkle a little bit of soil on top of that. Now, when you're done, you take another pot and use that pot to tamp the soil down until it's about 1/2 inch from the top of the pot. If you want to, you can do that tamping down step before you put the seeds in, sprinkle a little bit more soil on it, and then put your seeds on, and you won't have that 1/2 inch from the top. But you have to make sure that those seeds are covered. If you don't, they won't. We talked about what a seed needs to germinate. They won't have that. Next, now this is probably the most important step when you're planting seeds inside. Go ahead and plant as many as you want, and then you've got to create a very humid atmosphere for them. There are a couple ways you can do it. You can cover it up. You can cover it up with plastic wrap. You can put a plastic dome on top of it. whatever you do, just make sure that it's covered so that the moisture can't escape. You'll want to be checking it every day. And what I do, and I've heard other people do this too, and it seems to work really well. If you shake or tap off the moisture condensation that forms on top of that cover of whatever it is onto the seeds, it'll keep the top of the soil moist. And if you pre-moistened it, it's probably all the water that they will need until they start to come up and until after germination and the cover is removed. Oh, I meant to say something on the other one. If you feel that that soil is too dry after you patted the seeds into it, you may want to just kind of spritz it with a little bit of water. Don't saturate it, just spritz it with a little bit of water, spray. Okay, so as soon as you see seedlings coming up, see the little plants starting to pop up, remove the lid or the plastic wrap. But then it's on you for a while because you can't let that soil dry out because the seeds are sitting on top of the soil practically. So you'll have to go in there, and I would think, in my experience, if you just spray those on top, there's usually enough moisture in that soil, since we pre-moistened it, that you don't have to worry about the soil underneath the top 1/16 of an inch drying out. And then every day, flip the plastic over or shake it off and make sure that they get a little bit of moisture. You'll probably have, some of the seeds will pop up right away. Then a couple days later, a couple more will. And there's probably 4, 5, 6, 7 seeds that are kind of latecomers, but I almost always get 100% germination rate if I'm patient. When they first start coming up, you'll see that they have these little seed leaves. And if you remember that picture of the seed I showed you, these are the first ones. This is from the seed itself. They're called seed leaves. And then, and it doesn't look anything like the adult plant. And then come the adult leaves. These are tomato leaves. Now, this is the seed leaf here, and here's the tomato leaf. You can recognize that as a tomato leaf. So you'll hear us talking about true leaves, and that's what I'm talking about, when the leaf comes up that looks like the plant that it's supposed to be. You'll need to continue keeping your seedlings warm, 55, 60 degrees at night and 75 during the day, but you may or may not need a heating pad. We'll talk about that. Light, extremely important. If you're using fluorescents, you need to keep those, and this is the biggest problem. People always thought you should put your light up here and the plants down here, and that's plenty. No, they need the light 2 inches above the soil, or right above the top of the leaves. As they grow, you'll have to keep moving up your fluorescent bulbs, but keep them 1 to 2 inches above the seedlings. They also need air circulation from the time you remove the cover, and this will be a challenge because you want to make sure that that soil doesn't dry out. And then until germination takes place, you're going to have to really babysit it. Get one of these clip-on fans and put it on a gentle heat or gentle flow of air, and make sure that it's running across the top of the leaves very gently. This will help reduce the chances of getting damping off because you've got the air circulating. And it also helps, it just helps the health of the plant, makes it a little bit stronger too. And you want to keep that fan on every day, every night until you take it outdoors. It'll help to solve a lot of problems coming your way. So here are some ways to get healthy plant starts. Make sure if you're using used plant pots, you've got to sterilize them because they could have pathogens there that you really need to remove. You could have a 3-bucket station. Wash with soap and water with a brush to get all the old debris off, and then place it in a bleach bath of 1 cup of bleach to 9 cups of water, and put it in there for about 10 minutes, and you can rinse them and then just let them air dry. Always use new potting mix to fill the trays. Don't use old potting mix. Part of the problem, and I wanted to mention this, the potting mix, if you don't close it up, say you only use half a bag, close it up and put it in another Ziploc bag or something like that, because any kind of damp soil is an invitation to fungus gnats, and they will get in there, and you get 2 fungus gnats in there, and they lay eggs, and you've got a problem down the road. They thrive in too wet soil, but on the other hand, you really don't want to be introducing something in there that doesn't need to be. So if you have a partially open bag, make sure that you put it in a sealed container where they can't get in. So you want to make sure that you use clean tools, and you can use a heating pad. The only one that you really need to use a heating pad for, I would say, is peppers, but it can speed up germination, and it's much more satisfying. But if you don't have a heating pad, you're still okay. I had, when you're growing things at home, chances are you don't have a greenhouse. I didn't have a greenhouse. I had to put a table out in my garage, and I put blankets, rugs on top of that table, and then I put my heating pads on that, because if I turned the heating pads on and just the table, all the heat would have leaked out. So I kind of put insulation underneath it, and then I put my plants on it until they germinated. Now you got to get them off the heating pad as soon as they germinate, because while the seeds like the warmth to germinate, the roots don't. The roots don't like that heat, and I lost a whole tray full of basil that way. So I've learned by making mistakes. What I do instead, because it's cold in the garage and I wanted it a little bit warmer for them, I got, do you see this? Somebody put a tray over it. I got some upside down plastic trays, and I put a space between the mats and my seedling trays of about 4 inches, and then I made a tent with them with plastic. And that little bit of heat coming from the heat mats didn't warm it wasn't right next to the roots, so it was okay. And it made a little greenhouse atmosphere for them, so it was about 10 to 12 degrees warmer inside that little tent than it was in my garage, and they did very well. So you transplant after the last frost date, but the other important consideration is that you want to make sure that the soil has reached the best temperature, and most places that you read, it says greater than 50 degrees, and how do you tell that? Get a meat thermometer. You can get a soil thermometer, but everybody's got a meat thermometer. Stick it about 6-7 inches down into the soil and see if it's 50 degrees. What was I going to say? You can warm your soil up outside ahead of time. There are a couple different ways to have warmer soil. One is to use raised beds, and the other one is to pre-warm your soil. Get clear plastic. They used to say black plastic, but get clear plastic and cover the area where you're going to plant your plants, and over the period, about a month ahead of time, and your soil will warm up underneath that. So that's just one of the tips that you can use to get your plants started a little bit earlier outside. So, how to water? Again, moist, not soggy. Always use pots with drainage holes. I have found that I like watering plants better from the bottom because I can control it better. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Too much water promotes really leggy growth. It kind of like with the extra fertilizer almost. It just grows too fast for its own good. And too much water, like we said, can rob the plants of oxygen. So it's better to let it get nearly dry before you water again. And I know that just really hurts, especially when I'm going to tell you about the last one. Keep the hoses and water heads off the floor, and if you can, use warm water so you don't shock the little roots. It's not necessary, but it's probably better. So here's what I've started to do, and it works out best. I don't have to worry about the water being too wet, and I don't have to worry about it being too dry. Watch for one of those little plants just starting to wilt, and you know it's time to water then. Not all of them, and you don't want it to wilt a lot. Keep an eye on it, and you'll get the hang of it. You will get to know your plants, and when they're starting to look like they're just starting to droop, you'll know. So I like to bottom water. I don't disrupt the soil. You know, if you're watering from overhead, not only are you getting the leaves wet, which is conducive to to fungal problems, but it can knock those little plants down. I like to water from the bottom. I put about a quarter of an inch, half inch into the tray that they're in because it's here's the tray. It doesn't have holes in it. My little seedling pack, whoops, has holes in it. So I pour a little bit of water into the bottom of that, the green one, about half an inch, and the water absorbs. It wicks up through the potting mix. And I check it an hour later, and then I drain off any remaining water because you really don't want your roots sitting in water. Again, the oxygen problem. You don't want that water in there displacing the oxygen that your plants need. Use your finger to, you could also do that. Use your finger. Is the soil moist? Is it really dry? Is it soggy? So you'll kind of get an idea for that. If you underwater, if you can't look at the soil and discern that it's too wet, let your plants show you. The foliage starts to droop, like we said, but if it's an ongoing thing, the foliage kind of turns a little bit pale, and the seedlings kind of look, they just don't look healthy and vibrant. But the first one is wilt. What's really funny is overwatering shows this pretty much the same thing. Overwatering, the plants can be limp there too. Limp there, they don't grow very well. The foliage can turn yellow and it'll look crispy and dry, which is pretty sad. But both of the problems are that the roots don't have the kind of environment that they need. So the keys to starting hands, how about fertilizing? It is not essential. I think people think it is because they want to see the plant grow. If the seedling has 2 or 3 sets of true leaves like this one does at about 6 weeks, and this is 2 weeks before you put it in the ground, right? Because we're talking 8 weeks from the time you plant it until the time you transplant it into the ground. You can use a water-soluble fertilizer at 1/4 strength once every 7 to 10 days. But watch your plant. You don't want that plant to take off and start growing really fast and really big because more is not better at this stage. You want a nice, compact, healthy little plant that you can stick out in the garden. I like fish emulsion. It comes in a stinky little bottle that's concentrated, and I can't like a cap full of the stuff in a quart of water, but that's full strength. So you put a quarter of a cap full, I think it is, in a quart of water. The instructions are there, and you water it with that. If you need to water, again, try to use lukewarm water, again, so that you don't shock the roots. Light is really important, and people have a lot of questions about the different kind of light availability these days. You want to start lighting 2 days before you expect the seeds to come up. You've looked at the seedling pack and it says 7 to 10 days. I would put it up at 6 days and go from there. You've got to provide 12 to 16 hours of light, probably 16 from a fluorescent or a grow light. If you don't want to go out and spend a lot of money on grow lights, you can use a combination of cool white and natural daylight tubes. They do very well with that. But remember, they have to be 2 inches above the top of the seedlings at all times. As they grow, you keep moving the light up. Or like a friend of mine did, she had a beautiful fluorescent light. It was at 5 feet. It wasn't movable. So what she did was build up her table with boxes and put the plant up there right next to the light. And then as the plant grew, she changed boxes out and moved it down. Whatever it is, it's the distance from the light, however you have to work it. Cheap options, and they work absolutely perfect. You don't have to worry about spending a lot of money. Just go out and buy a shop light and get cool white tubes. The best ones would be for something around 5,000 Kelvin, and then one at 6,500 Kelvin. The 5,000 is kind of that warm light that we like in our houses, and the 6,500 is that blue light that's like being out in sunlight. If you put a combination of those, that's the best of both worlds for the plants. It'll produce just about everything you need and do a good job of it. If you want to spend a lot of money, you can go out and buy grow lights, and they have the absolute balance of warm and red, like we were doing with the combination of the two different fluorescent tubes in the example above. You get much thicker stems, better leaf growth, and flower production. If you just use 5,000 Kelvin, you end up with lush growth, but it's kind of leggy. The 6,500 full spectrum, or the cooler light, gives you compact, bushy growth. So you want kind of a combination of the two. LEDs, you can get them from cheap to expensive, and what I was reading says that you get what you pay for. I have one like this. I still haven't learned how to use it properly. It's really kind of a bizarre thing. They tell you to keep the light 16 inches away from the top of your plants. I did that and they burned. I moved it up 8 inches. They still burned, and I moved it up to almost like 30 inches, and the plants started doing fine. What I don't like about these, the ones with the colors like this, they changed the green color so that you're looking at something. The plant leaves almost look gray. I mean, it's because of the light, of course, but it's very unnerving. A lot of people have a lot of good luck with those LED grow lights, though. They are tricky. Now, I used this one year, these $20 LED grow lights. They're those little gooseneck lamps, and I had one tray of tomatoes right next to my fluorescents, and I used these on the seedlings, and I was not impressed with them, and they were down low. They grew, they just didn't grow as well as the others. However, once I got them in the garden, they were happy too. So I don't know how much difference it makes. People say, well, can I just put my plants in the window? I'd like to say yes. Maybe if you lived somewhere that we actually had sun when we were trying to grow plants, it might work, but we don't. And even so, the light coming in through the window really isn't the entire spectrum that the plant needs, the entire strength that the plant needs. This is a handy dandy thing. I bought these, and I'll show you the picture later. It wasn't real expensive, but what was nice about it, it's a T-bar, and it's got the light here, and you could raise and lower it with the ratchet pulley. What I liked it for, I had this in my basement, which unfinished part of my basement, which is like 60 degrees on a good day. Usually it's like 55. It was too cold for what I wanted, so I draped plastic over it, and I made it into a greenhouse with the with the fan growing down it. I had beautiful plants. So the closer you can get your lights to the plants without burning them, the better they are. So you got to know what that looks like. Again, 16 hours a day, fluorescents we talked about, LEDs, you have to look at what they say and then go from there. If the plants don't get enough light, they're going to get leggy. They're stretching or bending toward the light. And that's usually an indication that the light's too far away, or it's from the plant, or it's just not enough light. If you get too much light, you're going to see bleached out leaves, yellowish, pale leaves, and it might stop growing, and the leaves might wither and fall from the plant. The too much light shuts down the photosynthetic process in the leaves. So there are two things you can do about it. You can either if it's too much light, move the light a little bit away from the plants, or put it up for 12 hours instead of 16. And again, take notes, because you don't want to repeat the same thing next year, and you want to see exactly, you want to write down when you made the change, what change you made, and what you're observing in your plant, what worked and what didn't. That's the important thing. So this is what you can do like this. This is what you do to get the airflow there. This is what damping off looks like. Now this is in my basement. See that T-bar I showed you in the other picture? And you can see little bitty seedlings starting out there, and I've got that right down on top of them. You see that yellow or that orange not orange, come on, pink, purple. That's from that cheap LED that I got from Amazon. Like I said, it didn't grow like the others, but it did fine in the garden. When I transplanted those seedlings, they were great. And you can't see it, but I've got the fans in the other end. So I had a nice little tunnel there. It was toasty in there. And you could see how I have the seedling mats here, and I separated them from my seeds, my little seedlings, with this tray, which collected water, and with this tray here. So they were about 2-3 inches away from the seed mat and the heating mat, and it just created a nice warm atmosphere, and the roots are quite happy. So this is what the light looks like. I wish I could show you what the green looks like with that color. And like I said, they did okay. Not great, okay. So should you fertilize though? Obviously the goal to plant a nice plant in your garden is to have a compact, healthy plant. They actually don't need any nutritional support from germination until they have their first true set of leaves, because everything was in the little seed itself. Most people, I would say 2/3 of the people, have really good success, and they never fertilize until they stick them in the ground. Too much fertilizer, which is what happened to me with my tomato plants, you get a lot of growth, but it's lanky, the stems are weak, it's not good for the plant, and that makes them very difficult to transplant. Watch your plant. If the lighting and watering okay and the leaves start to look pale, you know, if you know that they're getting the light that they need, and you know you're not overwatering or underwatering, and then the leaves start to look pale yellow, chances are they might need a little bit of a pick-me-up, and that would be at about 6 weeks after planting. Use a very dilute 1/4 strength liquid fertilizer, and never ever use a granule fertilizer on seedlings. It's way too strong for them, because they're concentrated, and if the roots came in contact with them, it'd be just too much. I'm not sure if I have that one in there or not. You know, your plant doesn't know the difference between organic and inorganic fertilizers. It's a chemical for them. They use it. An organic option is fish emulsion, but you can still use something that's like one of the indoor plant fertilizers. If the NPK, the nitrogen part of it, is good, you can use that too. It's not it unless you're trying to sell something as completely organic. It doesn't really matter. But the organic fertilizers, this stage of the game, other than something that you can dilute in water, don't work well. So what next? After you've grown your transplant and the seedling's about 4 to 5 inches tall, it's about time to transplant them. They are not going to get the room that they need. They're not going to get the nutrients. They're not going to be able to get what they need in that little pot, especially if you're putting them in cells that are this size. So what you do is get plastic cups work good, or you could just go out and buy some little pots, but why not just use plastic pots or little plastic cups with holes punched in their bottoms. You probably want it a little bit taller than where they started out. Lift the seedlings by the root ball. You can kind of squeeze it out gently and kind of tap it if you can. Maybe use a spoon to support it, but you don't want to yank it by the stem. And you can just basically set it in the new pot and then backfill it with the new soil that you've got there. You can use potting soil at this point in time, not just the seed starting mix. And you want to bury it all the way up to those leaves. Those leaves. If you have to take off a couple of leaves, you just want maybe 4 or 5 leaves sticking out of the soil. And it just breaks your heart, because you started out with a 6, 7, 8 inch plant, and you tore the leaves off and you buried it, and you've got, you know, just 2, 3 inches sticking out of the soil. But I'll tell you what, you give it a couple days and those things are going to come back like gangbusters, and they will be good and they'll be healthy. So that's what it looked like. And I transplanted it. I put it in the soil. All there were little leaves sticking up. And within 4 or 5 days, I had a nice, bushy, happy, healthy plant. In that WSU publication I showed you earlier, it gives you this kind of information for just about everything. When to plant. Cucumber is one of those plants you don't want to plant in March because you only, in fact, it might be one that you want to wait to plant in the ground outside, but you can start it inside. But it only needs 4 weeks. If you're planning on planting it on May 1st or on June 1st, then start it on May 1st. No sooner. And cucumbers are extremely, and all squash are extremely sensitive to cold. Even something like, 45 degrees, they do not like it and they won't do well. You might have leaves that are burned by the cold and you'll see white spots on them. Chances are they'll survive, but cover them at night and they'll do a lot better and they'll come back eventually, but it'll take a while. Squash is another one, and muskmelon's another one that you want to only have in indoor pots if you're going to do it at all for 4 weeks or less before you plant it outside. So, troubleshooting. I'm going to kind of quickly go through this because we're running out of time. One of the handouts you have is a troubleshooting guide, and it goes into the same things. But if your seeds aren't germinating, they might be too old, they might be planted too deep, soil might be wet or dry, and the temperature might not be where it's supposed to be. And these seeds may need special treatment. That's for different kind of plants. But if they're poor quality, they may never germinate. Damping off, we talked about that. You want to use lightweight, sterile soil. You don't want to use garden soil or potting soil from the store. Clean equipment. Make sure that you keep the humidity dome on until they start to germinate and then remove it and give good circulation. If you've got leggy seedlings, there are so many reasons for that. They can have too much fertilizer. There could be weak light where they're reaching for the light. You can have overwatering where they're just crazy growth, but they're not doing really well. Overcrowding, they're all trying to reach the light at the same time. So keep your eye on your plants for that. There are a couple of things you can do with a leggy seedling, and this was new to me. Joe Gardner show, a wonderful idea. Snip and dip. If you've got a whole bunch of plants that you kind of neglected, you can cut them off about halfway, stick them in water, and within 2 weeks, you've rooted plants, and you can plant those. And you would plant them just like we transplanted the little seedlings, bury them up to 4 or 5 leaves, and you'll have a great plant. And this is what it looks like. And it works. If you have stunted growth, there are a bunch of different reasons for that. You can have nutrient deficiency. Probably not. If you're using a mix with coir in it, coconut coir that was harvested by the ocean, you might have excess salt in it, and you would leach it out by running it in water. Excess light, like we talked about, you'll also see stunted growth. You can get discolored foliage for a number of reasons too, and we talked about those. It can be nutrient deficiency. If it's nitrogen deficiency, they'll be yellow, assuming the soil's okay. If you have a red underside of the leaves, you may have a phosphorus deficiency, and you can give it a little bit of mild fertilizer with the middle number, which is phosphorus, of the NPK, a little bit, but it's going into the soil within 2 weeks. I would wait. It'll probably do better out there. It can pull what it needs from the soil outside. It can't from what it's potted in the house. The bleached or white or tan, we talked about the light is too intense, especially if the top of the leaves are bleached, the part closest to the lights. Okay. Transplant shock is something that is shocking to everybody who's ever done it. When you transplant your plants, their roots are in a whole new system, and it takes them a while to get acclimated. Make sure that they're watered properly. Don't overwater them. This can happen to the best of plants, but within 48 hours, most of them, if not all of them, will pop right back up, and they'll be happy. So one last thing before I actually show you how to do this with the kits. Oh, like I said, we're selling these kits. If you're interested, we're selling these kits online, and I think that Nancy put the link over in the chat for $10, and that's the kits I'm going to be using. But before you plant your plants outside, you could have done everything right up to now, but if you don't harden these plants off, they won't make it. When your plants are indoors, the leaves stay very soft, and they don't have any of the hard sunlight on them. They need to be gradually introduced outside to sunlight so that the cuticle on top of the leaf can harden off. It's kind of like you don't want to go out first day of summer and go out there with your bathing suit on a hot day and get burnt to a crisp. You want to do it a little bit at a time. Dappled sunlight for 20, 40, 60 minutes on successive days to about a week. And that should harden them off sufficiently so that you can plant them in the garden. Fertilizer burn. This is another one. If you're not fertilizing, which I recommend, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you see brown leaf margins around the edges of the leaf that's brown, chances are you have fertilized it too much, and one way to get rid of that extra fertilizer is to run water in it and flush the pot of those fertilizer salts. Within a week, it should look fine. So I'm going to ask you to switch over to, what is that? Not gallery view, speaker view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And I'm going to attach my camera to
Are you done with the screen, Alice? Can I stop sharing?
Yes, thank you.
So if you go up to the upper left-hand corner, you'll see view, hit that, and you should see speaker view, and that's going to put only Alice on the screen so you'll be able to see a little bit better.
It makes the screen a little bit bigger so that you should be able to see it. In fact, I'm going to do that so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to change from gallery to speaker view. Okay, so here's the little seed cell pack. And I've discovered that you put exactly 3 cups of the potting mix into this bag, and I put 3 ounces of water in it, warm water into it. And then I squish it around to distribute the water, and let me show you consistency. See how it holds together? But I don't think I could squeeze water out of that. No. Well, I can see a little drop hanging there. So what I'm going to do is fill the whole thing. Let me move this out of the way. Before I did this, I got my plant tag out. I got the labels ready, the label ready for it, because you would be surprised how easy it is to forget what you planted there. Way easier than I'd like to say. So I've got this pack pretty full. Messy, but it's full. Now what I like to do, I get the other tray, tamp it down gently. I'm not pushing hard. Now that one needs a little bit more. Then get your seeds. I'm planting Korean mint. It's an insectary plant. Here's the seeds. They're very small. And I'm going to plant 2 to 3 seeds in each one of these. I don't think you can see it because they're really small and they're the same color. Okay. Now, I have 2 options. I can just kind of rough it up over the top or sprinkle a little bit of potting mix over top. I think that's what I'm going to do. And then tamp them down again. I'm not going to water this. I may spray it later with just a little bit of water. I'm going to put it in its tray. And I'm going to cover it with its dome. And that is all you have to do. I mean, it's really very simple. Again, I've got my plant tag.